I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily News for Monday, February 28th. And tonight, Canada and other Western allies strike hard at Russia's banks. Effective immediately, all Canadian financial institutions are prohibited from engaging in any transactions with the Russian central bank. The announcement was made Monday morning by Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. Canada is also imposing an asset freeze and prohibiting dealings with Russian sovereign wealth funds. According to the government's press release, this is also the first time that a central bank of a G20 country has been sanctioned in this manner. The Canadian government also joined with allies over the weekend in condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. On Saturday, the leaders of Canada, the UK, US, France, Germany, Italy, and the European Union issued a joint statement saying they would hold Russia to account. They announced a series of restrictive measures and sanctions. These include removing select Russian banks from the international SWIFT messaging system, restricting the Russian central bank, sanctioning individuals and freezing their assets, and coordinating against disinformation. This came as people around the world show solidarity with Ukraine. In Canada, hundreds of people gathered outside the Russian embassy in Ottawa on Sunday to protest the invasion of the country. Other protests took place across the country as well. On Sunday, the government announced that Canadian airspace would be closed to all Russian aircraft operators, and it would remain in effect until further notice. Canada also announced plans to send $25 million worth of defensive equipment to Ukraine, along with cybersecurity experts and airlift support. Meanwhile, Canada's foreign minister is telling a United Nations panel in Europe that Russia lied to the world in the run-up to its invasion of Ukraine. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly also called on Moscow to respect the rights of Russian people who have taken to the streets to protest their government's decision to invade Ukraine. Minister Joly says Russia chose to resort to lies and violence to fabricate an excuse to attack Ukraine. She delivered the denunciation of President Vladimir Putin today at a meeting of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. All right, turning to a recent UN climate report, which has grim warnings for Canada. It says global warming is already having a big effect in this country, pointing to wildfires in the west and declining seafood harvests in the east. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report predicts that in the decades ahead, parts of provinces from Ontario through BC, as well as Yukon and the Northwest Territories, will all experience water shortages in the growing season. The government moved to ease border restrictions this morning. It has lifted the requirement for fully vaccinated travelers to take a pre-departure COVID-19 molecular test. The federal government announced earlier this month that double vaccinated air and land travelers no longer need to present a negative molecular test result, such as a PCR test, before departure for Canada. Unvaccinated children under 12 also no longer need to self-isolate upon return to the country, and Ottawa has lifted its blanket advisory against trips abroad. Meanwhile, Saskatchewan lifted its remaining COVID-19 restrictions today, becoming the first province in Canada to do so. Residents no longer have to wear masks in indoor public places and are not required to self-isolate for 5 days if they test positive for the virus. Saskatchewan ditched its vaccine passport on February 14th. February 28th is the final day of Black History Month in Canada. Statistics Canada released an info sheet to mark the day and the contributions and accomplishments of Black Canadians and their communities. Highlighting a positive outlook, Statistics Canada found that 76% of immigrants and 85% of non-immigrants felt their life opportunities would improve in the next 5 years. Moving to a big acquisition by one of Canada's top banks. TD Bank Group is buying First Horizon Corporation in a deal worth $13.4 billion US. The bank, based in Memphis, Tennessee, operates 412 branches and has more than 1.1 million customers, businesses, and commercial customers across 12 states. TD's American business is already one of the 10 largest banks in the U.S. Time for a look at the markets now. North American stocks are in the red on worries about how high oil prices will go and how badly the global economy will get hit amid sanctions on Russia. The Russian ruble tumbled to a record low, below a penny at one point. Oil prices on both sides of the Atlantic are up more than 3%. This is on concerns about what the worsening tensions will do to crude supplies because Russia is one of the world's largest energy producers. All right, stay with us. We'll be right back after the break with a look at the invasion of Ukraine and disinformation with Marcus Kolga, the founder of Disinfo Watch. That and, of course, more news from around the world only on Forum Daily News. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. A lack of reliable information from Russia has made covering the invasion of Ukraine a lot tougher for reporters worldwide. Associated Press journalists are documenting military activity across Ukraine where disinformation is spiking during the Russian invasion. With social media amplifying a torrent of military claims and counterclaims, determining exactly what is happening can be difficult. The Ukrainian government is asking the public to follow and promote information from verified sources. With us to discuss disinformation, misinformation, and bad information is Mr. Marcus Kolga, founder of disinfowatch.org. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So let's start with a quick overview of how disinformation is impacting the situation overall within Ukraine.
Well, the Russian government has been engaging in an intense campaign of information warfare against Ukraine for the past number of years, even going back to 2014. But that's only intensified over the past 5 to 6 months. Some of these narratives are intended, most of these narratives, in fact, are intended to delegitimize the government. There are claims that the government is run by a Nazi militia, that that Ukraine itself isn't an actual legitimate country, that Ukrainian isn't a language. The country, of course, is democratically elected. It's run by a Jewish president. And so all of these fabrications are intended to, quite frankly, erode Western support for Ukraine and to intensify anger in the Russian people when Russian government propaganda is faced towards them, to generate anger and support for Russian aggression towards Ukraine. And the levels of misinformation and disinformation that we're seeing right now in this conflict are unlike anything that we've seen before. Russia is throwing everything it has at Ukraine right now, and it's distorting, or its efforts to distort perceptions of the conflict and of Ukraine are thankfully proving to be rather unsuccessful, at least in the West right now.
Well, taking into consideration this constant coverage of the invasion of Ukraine, how can viewers sort fact from fiction?
That is a very good question. I mean, there are limited sources of information right now coming out of Ukraine. A lot of Western journalists have left or they've moved to the West. So images from the conflict itself are often coming from social media feeds of resistance fighters, of the army on the ground. And so making sure that we know what is true and what is false is very important. Of course, Canadians should be following primarily mainstream media. These are the BBC, CNN, Canadian outlets. The Globe and Mail is exceptionally good. Their journalists, Mark McKinnon is probably one of the best in the world. Nathan Vandercliffe as well. They're in Ukraine right now, so viewers can look to the Globe and Mail as a source. Radio Free Europe, Liberty is also an excellent source. And if you're looking for on-the-ground content, videos, photographs, you can go to the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry. There's also an online service called Nexta. This is a service that started in Belarus during the uprisings there a year and a half ago. Nexta is a very good source for photos, live video coming from the conflict zones, and specifically Kharkiv at this hour right now.
And you mentioned Russia has long been connected to disinformation campaigns for over 10 years now. So is there a recognizable pattern that they use in these disinformation campaigns?
Well, I mean, absolutely. They often there's a kernel of truth that is taken, and then that gets completely distorted. So in the Ukrainian case, there are problems, just as there are in every single European nation, right here in Canada as well, with far-right movements. They've taken these small fringe movements and turned it into a problem. And as I mentioned earlier, the Russian state media is suggesting that the Ukrainian government is run by a Nazi militia. Those sorts of narratives get amplified on Russian state media, on platforms like RT, on other conspiracy theory websites. In the very worst cases, these narratives get amplified by members of parliament. And in fact, there was a Winnipeg federal member of parliament, a Canadian member of parliament, just 3 weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago, rather, when Canada announced that it would be sending a $120 million loan to Ukraine. This member of parliament tweeted that she objected to money being sent to a Ukrainian government that is run by neo-Nazi militia. So there you have it. You have Russian state media being laundered through state media platforms, various other platforms, and arriving on social media where it's tweeted by a member of parliament. That's the sign of a successful campaign, but thankfully she's retracted that statement since then.
All right, Mr. Kolga, thank you again for your insight into this on social media and around the world, sir. Thank you.
Anytime. Thanks for having me on.
We'll be right back. As world powers continue to react to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, questions remain about whether crippling economic sanctions on the powerful country would be enough to end the ongoing invasion. The United States, European Union, the UK, and other Western allies have targeted Russia's finance and economy, individual Russian officials, including President Vladimir Putin, Russian industries and transport, as well as sporting events and other restrictions. Over the weekend, Canada was among the countries moving to block Russian access to SWIFT, which would directly impact Russia's central bank's ability to support the ruble. Well, joining us now to help us unpack these recent developments is the Honourable Stockwell Day, consultant and former international trade minister. Mr. Day, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hi, good to be with you again, Nima.
Now, Mr. Day, you have some very deep connections with humanitarian organizations around Ukraine. Just about an hour ago, you got some updates on what's happening there. So tell us what you learned.
Yeah, that's right. I think you'll probably be the first in Canada to get these updates. This information is less than an hour old. The organizations have a broad network of humanitarian efforts. I have been to Ukraine, of course, on trade missions, but also working with these humanitarian groups. So this is verifiable information, very current. And I think you're going to be interested in this. First of all, just to the north, and they operate men's rehab centers, homes for widows, widowed for various reasons, and also orphanages and schools. Right to the north, a gentleman had called in. He's from one of these centers, a director, and he drove up to the border to Poland to take his kids there and his wife there. He said they waited 44 hours in line just to get to the border, to get their families across the border. He is, of course, he's in the age group. He's under 60. He has to go back. He said the response at the border from local towns bringing out food, bringing out water and provisions for them was amazing. Now, in the town of Zhytomyr, which is slightly to the west and to the north of Kiev, only a couple of missiles have been fired in there so far. But more concerning is 1 hour north and again to the west of Kiev, in a place called Korostan. They're really getting hit hard by the missiles. It's a manufacturing area, but it's a poor area. And so citizens have been going out. The only way they're defending themselves have been putting cement blocks out on the road to try and stop the anticipated attacks and armored tanks and armored vehicles that will be coming in. 3 hours north of Kiev, they've got two centers there. And this would be a bit towards Belarus. Again, another manufacturing. It seems to be these manufacturing areas that are getting hit hard. In Lviv, which you've been talking about, it's west, again, close to the Polish border. It's still quiet. There's a couple of missiles that have come into that particular area. But here's the one I think you're going to find, and your viewers will find interesting. Down to the south and near the Black Sea, there's a community there, and you hear this term gypsies, which are really Ukrainian Roma folks, and they operate there. They've got a large camp there because most of these men work in the mines, so they are very familiar with running equipment. They're hardworking people, but they live in their own area. While they observed the Russians in a camp close to where the mine was, when the Russians had left and gone into their own camp and left their tanks, they actually got across into that area. These guys who know how to work heavy equipment, they stole 3 of the Russian tanks. and brought them back to their area. There was quite a lot of celebration. But here's the other, I find this the most interesting, Nima. Russian soldiers who are being captured there, and some of these folks captured them, were told when they started this, they were told by Putin and his commanders that they were just going to be going to do some military exercises. They did not know that they were in an attack mode. And when they've been taken prisoner, Russians have already been taken prisoner. They are crying. They are saying, we were not told what we were doing. They're allowed to phone home to Russia, and their wives and their mothers and others that they're talking to are saying, what are you doing? Don't you know you're killing Ukrainians? This is terrible. You have to come home. So it's what we thought was, people are wondering, are the Ukrainian military going to cave? Will they stand up? The Ukrainian military is standing up. The captured Russian soldiers are completely, they're weeping. They're completely devastated by what is happening. So these reports are like about 1 hour old, Nima.
Wow, Mr. Day, definitely have to keep an eye on these developing situations in Ukraine, especially with these Russian soldiers. Sir, thank you again for your insight and connections within that region.
Happy to do it.
Thank you, sir. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily.
All right.
Coming up after the break, more news from around the world as the UN General Assembly opens its first emergency session in decades. We'll be right back. The UN General Assembly opened its first emergency session in decades this morning in order to deal with the Ukraine invasion. The Assembly's president called for an immediate ceasefire, maximum restraint by all parties, and a full return to diplomacy and dialogue. Meanwhile, talks between Russia and Ukraine lasted nearly 5 hours, but they did not bring an end to Russia's invasion. An aide to Russia's president says the two sides, quote, found certain points on which common positions could be foreseen. All right, well, meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has signed an application for Ukraine to join the European Union and has sent the documents off to Brussels. The news came in a Facebook post of a picture of Mr. Zelensky with the caption, "The history is being created now." The UN General Assembly opened an extraordinary emergency session this morning with pleas for peace in Ukraine, starting a day of frenzied diplomacy at the UN. Russian President Vladimir Putin made a clear link between ever-tightening sanctions and his decision Sunday to raise Russia's nuclear posture. He also pointed at aggressive statements by NATO as a reason for his move. U.S. and British officials played down Mr. Putin's nuclear threat, and its practical meaning was not immediately clear. Russia and the United States typically have land and submarine-based nuclear forces that are prepared for combat at all times, but nuclear-capable bombers and other aircraft are not. This comes as European Union countries close their airspace to flights from Russia. Russia's diplomatic mission says Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has canceled his trip to the United Nations in Geneva after the move. Mr. Lavrov had been expected to attend high-level meetings at the Human Rights Council and the Conference of Disarmament. This comes as Russians are facing higher prices and Western sanctions over the invasion of Ukraine. One analyst says this is the West causing a currency crisis for Russia. In Ukraine, citizens are fleeing from Russia's invading forces, and the mass exodus of refugees from Ukraine to the eastern edge of the European Union continued on Monday. Exact death tolls are unclear, but the UN human rights chief said 102 civilians have been killed and hundreds wounded. But the UN warns that figure was likely a vast undercount. UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, tweeted on Monday that more than 500,000 refugees have now fled from Ukraine into neighboring countries. Meantime, the International Olympic Committee is urging sports bodies to exclude Russian athletes and officials from international events. The IOC says it acted with a heavy heart, but the impact of war on Ukrainian sports outweighs the potential damage done to Russian athletes. The decision opens the way for soccer's governing body to exclude Russia from a World Cup qualifying playoff match on March 24th. Russian athletes will have to compete as neutral athletes at the upcoming Paralympics in Beijing. Well, we know the Swiss are legendary for their neutrality, but the country's president says Russia's attack on Ukraine is unacceptable on moral and political grounds. Switzerland is not a member of the European Union, but it is adopting EU sanctions against Moscow, including freezing assets. That is all but depriving well-heeled Russians of access to one of their favorite havens to park their money. Toyota says it is suspending production at all 28 lines of its 14 plants in Japan. This is because of a system malfunction that a domestic supplier suspects is a cyber attack. Kojima Industries, based in central Japan, makes a wide range of auto parts. It says the problem is likely due to a cyber attack, as an error was detected in its computer server system. Moving to current world efforts to reduce plastic waste. United Nations member countries are considering proposals for a binding global treaty to curb plastic pollution. The UN Environment Assembly, meeting February 28th to March 2nd in Kenya, is expected to propose an international framework. This to address the growing problem of plastic waste in the world's oceans, rivers, and landscapes. And we end the newscast with some good news about Canada. In this year's edition of the Most Thoughtful Societies Index, Canada was ranked one of the most thoughtful societies worldwide. Canada was rated as the second most thoughtful society of 2022, with the Netherlands taking the top spot. But Canada ranked first as the best country for state-provided elderly care. In other categories, Canada ranked as the sixth best country for minority equality, and it took the number 8 spots for the most volunteer work done and the most charitable donations, as well as most compassionate society. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.